Welcome, good evening. Yogena chittasya padena vacham malam sarirasya cha vaidyakena yopakurutam pravaram muninam patanjalim pranjaliranatosmi stuve patanjalim vyasam shankaram cha munitrayam katra sutrasya bhashyasya kramat vivaranasya cha. I think we were discussing or rather we are expected to supposed to discuss the 15th Sutra today. It is a continuation of the subject that we discussed in the 12th Sutra, Abhyasa Vairagyabhyam Tannirodha. So, this Nirodha, I mean Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, Nirodha Vrittis, that is yoga, and that is the path to samadhi, which is actually yoga itself. Now, which is twofold, which is samprajnata and asamprajnata samadhi. Abhyasa and vairagya, that is the practice, repeated practice, abhyasa and vairagya, and dispassion. These two constitute the path to yoga. In a way, we'll find out to higher evolution in human life. And in the 14th Sutra, the Sutrakara, the teacher Patanjali says this should be practiced for a long time without any interruption, that is Dirghakala, Nairantarya, and Satkara with the great sense of devotion, Shraddha, a sense of sanctity and sacredness. And this Abhyasa then becomes firmly grounded. Now, Vairagya is explained, the mean dispassion is explained in the 15th and 16th Sutras. So there are two levels of Vairagya. Vairagya should be understood as dispassion. One may be baffled how can somebody can practice this dispassion, and how can dispassion have two different levels, one lower level, secondary, and the higher level. That is aparavairagya, secondary, and paravairagya, supreme dispassion. Secondary, the first stage, and the supreme dispassion, the second stage. Well, in actual practice, from a common from a common sense point of view, Abhyasa is the ability to say no to sense pleasures. In the context of human life and activities, when we try to say no, when our senses and of course mind together demand for more and more things, more and more pleasures, you should be able to say no. At the first stage, it acts as some kind of a restriction. Suppose you are moderately rich and well off and well settled, you have a job. Still mind may become greedy. Senses will drag the mind towards various sense pleasures, sense objects. And if one can practice dispassion, he will be able to restrain his senses. Senses won't be able to drag the mind towards various objects. That is the first stage. That is apara vairagya. Apara means that which is not supreme, that which is not para. So when para comes before a consonant, it becomes opposite of it. When so a comes before para means apara. An comes before ishta, anishta. So when before a vowel an comes and before a consonant a comes. So apara means that which is not supreme, that which leads you to supreme dispassion. If a person is born with a natural spontaneous sense of dispassion, Some of the great spiritual teachers of the world, the great epoch makers, are grand examples of the Paravairagya. They're born with that. You can find in the lives of spiritual persons, it's almost like a play of a drama. I mean, they won't waste time. The trial and error is not applied. Right from the early days of their life, they seem to practice certain higher spiritual values. They are able to say no to their own mind, to their own senses. So this ability to say no means you are actually climbing up the ladder of evolution, not biological evolution, which doesn't have any way to go. It has already come to an end. But at a spiritual and cultural level, at a level of values and culture, there is still a lot of scope for evolution. You can find, on the one hand, you have great spiritual teachers, for examples. On the other end, there are people, the other extreme, who can never say no to anything. They will never be able to get out of this incessant search for pleasures and enjoyment. Anyway, the ability to practice dispassion means the ability to say to oneself a strong, firm no. That is the idea. Now, in the sutra, Patanjali gives the sutra, that is the 15th sutra. Sutra is Drishta Anusraviga Vishaya Vitrashnasya Vashikara Samjna Vairagyam. It's a fairly long sutras. So, Drishta, this is one word. Drishta means worldly, earthly pleasures. That's normally sensory pleasures, enjoyments that a person wants to enjoy in this life, at the material level. So that is one. Laukika is the word used by some of the commentators to explain drishta. Drishta actually means what is seen, what is perceived, what is in a way visible. That is drishta. So what it means is empirical, worldly pleasures. Anusravika, anusrava. Anusravam in Sanskrit it means Vedas. Vedas in Sanskrit, but kept in the context of other religious traditions, you may say, let us say, some of the rewards which are promised in heaven, in the celestial world after death. That plane of existence is called Anusrava, or it is already explained in the Vedas, in the theological literature. In the Puranas you find a lot of things are mentioned. So many things are promised as rewards for people who do wonderful things, and of course there is a lot of threats also. If you don't do things the right way, you will be sent to heaven. So both you find in these mythological literature. Now, some people may not have any desire to enjoy anything at empirical level. They are all satisfied, but they want to continue enjoyments, or rather they want to enjoy these heavenly pleasures after death. So that also is actually some kind of a bondage in Vedanta. In Vedanta, even a desire to enjoy heavenly things is a desire, is a bondage. I have to remember, we should always remember, those of you and I think many of us are not really aware of the difference between the word heavenly as used in books explaining yoga, Vedanta, Indian philosophy, and its meaning in the Christian or Abrahamic religious traditions. So in Abrahamic religious traditions and Christian mystical, especially in Christian mythological traditions, heavenly could mean something spiritual, So it is not in that sense that the word heavenly is used in Vedantic literature. In Vedanta or in Hindu higher philosophy, heaven is an extension of enjoyments in this world. So heaven is explained and described in many books, wonderful things you can have. And if a person has a desire for that, it is not the way to yoga. You should practice dispassion even towards that heavenly pleasures. But in the theological traditions, the Christian theological tradition, there are of course certain other enjoyments which are offered in heaven. But there is also the association of the divine when you talk about heavenly experiences. That is not implied in Vedanta or yoga. So Anusravika here means certain books in Hindu tradition which describe heavenly enjoyments that a person can have if he does wonderful, good, meritorious deeds in this world with a lot of desire. He will have these wonderful things when he goes to heaven. So that is the meaning here. So Drishta and Anusravika. So before you reach this level of higher dispassion, you should be able to get rid of your desire for both heavenly enjoyments and also for worldly empirical enjoyments. Now, such a person who has transcended these desires, Vashikara Samjna, Vairagyam, such a person will have this Vashikara Samjna, means you are the master of these. Then your senses, your mind, everything become your slaves. You are not enslaved by the senses. You are not the dictates. You are not dictated by your own senses or your own mind. Rather, your mind and your senses are within your control. So that is an important point. That is called Vashikara Samjna. So Vashikara means you have controlled them. They are not controlling you. So when we use a strong wordly no to our mind, that's very important. Even for simple common sense, higher wisdom, we should be able to practice the ability to say no, where to stop. That is actually a sign of higher wisdom, higher evolution. In fact, in modern times, with all the wonderful, the power and knowledge and blessings that we have got from science and technology, the explosive developments in science and technology, if we can also practice the ability to say no to certain demands coming from our senses, then human civilization will be safe, self-restrained, self-control, with the mark of an evolved person. So that is called Vashikara Samjna. Such a person will have this Vairagyam. Vairagya means dispassion. Swamiji explains this in his complete works in English, which perhaps I can just read from Swamiji's complete works. In simple language, he explains this. Swamiji says, the two motive powers of our actions are what we see ourselves and the experience of others. These two forces throw the mind to leak into various ways. Renunciation, that is Vairagya, is the power of battling against these forces and holding the mind in check. How do we hold mind in check? When we don't allow the mind to be dragged by the senses to various sense objects. So means when the eyes catch a visual object, then mind develops a desire to possess that visual object. And then a person should be able to tell his or her mind, no, I don't want that. Then you may see things, but you won't have the desire to possess those things. So as I mentioned earlier, all the great contributions that have enriched and empowered human civilization. Not only at the spiritual, philosophical level, even in areas like art, great literature, great music, all are the fruits of men and women who could say no to their own senses. Remember, when I talk about music and art and literature, I'm really talking about the more sublime, more elevating kinds of literature, art and music, because there are many things in these very areas which rather are only activate the lower drives of the senses and mind. I am not talking about anything high, anything that is elevating, that is sublime in art, literature and music. Not only in philosophy and spirituality, that's of course obvious. All the contributions of men and women who could say no. Look at Einstein, man like Einstein, for example. You don't include Einstein in the category of Buddha. Of course, there are people who do that. Okay, that's wonderful. But many people may not include Einstein in the category of Jesus and Buddha. Einstein was a great scholar, a highly intelligent person. But he also practiced this self-restraint, renunciation to some of the lower desires. That's why he could become such an outstanding scientist. Also great Michelangelo, Da Vinci. I'm just giving examples from Western world. Of course, there are innumerable examples from different cultures, wonderful examples, elevating, sublime examples you can see. So the ability to say no, that's a very important quality. That maybe that alone can help human civilization to survive in this modern time. We talk about pollutions, ecological pollution called global warming, all because of desire. And desire is the result of our inability to say no to our own senses. So Swamiji is giving an example from another perspective. Swamiji says, therefore renunciation is what we want. I am passing through a street and a man comes and takes away my watch. That's my own experience. I see it myself and it immediately throws my chitta, means mind, into a wave, different vrittis, taking the form of anger. So mind immediately takes the form of anger. If you're walking through the streets, somebody takes away your wallet, you become angry. Mind assumes the form of anger. Now Swamiji says, allow not that to come. If you cannot prevent that, you are nothing. If you can, you have vairagya. So, it's a simple example. Simple example. We should prevent our own mind from taking the form of anger. Again, the experience of the worldly mind teaches us that sense enjoyments are the highest ideal. These are tremendous temptations. To deny them and not allow the mind to come to a wave form with regard to them is renunciation. There are people, of course, who tell you, being all over the world, in all times, in all ages, there were being people who taught wonderful things and who also taught things which are really not so wonderful. And we can see such specimens even today if you open any newspaper. Things that will tempt our mind and senses. So we should be able to exercise our own power to say no to ourselves. Now, this ability to say no, this vairagyam, according to commentators, are sometimes described as threefold, sometimes as fourfold. One is yatamana, means yatamana vairagya. Yatamana means it's in the form of self-restraint. We make an effort with the mind. What is the right thing in this world? What is the wrong thing in this world? That is yatamana vairagya. Is according to, of course, this you find most elaborately described in the Yoga Sutagaram. which is a commentary on Yoga Sutra by Sadasiva Brahmendra Saraswati, who lived in the late 18th century. Sadasiva Brahmendra Saraswati was an Avadhuta. So he wrote this well-known book, is Yoga Sudhakara. So there Yatamanam in the beginning, the first stage of Vairagya is characterized by the ability to say, I have learned from the scriptures and from the Guru as to what is the goal of human life, and I must strive to attain that higher goal that I have learned from books or from scriptures or from maybe instructions. So the ability to take a decision, such a strong will to practice this. We read a great book, take a strong decision. That is actually the stepping stone. It's called Yatamana Vairagya. Then second one is Vetiregi, means now in our mind certain desires have already gone. There are still many more desires yet to be destroyed. That is Vetireka. Vetireka means there is a change. It's characterized by the attitude. So many of my vasanas are being exhausted. You feel a lot of undesirable impressions, tendencies, impulses in the mind. I have succeeded in restraining some of them, but some of them are still remaining. So at this stage, an attempt is made to break the many interconnections between impulses and memories. So at that time we are trying to disconnect ourselves from our own impulses and memories. That is the second stage. The third stage is called Ekendriya. That is, we should understand that all sense pleasures are evil, and the yogi does not allow his senses to seek their objects. He maintains an attitude of disinterested witness. I mean, things are happening in front of you, but you watch them, you observe them without getting involved. So, that is the, mind is not attached. Mind still remains a witness. That is Ekendriya. And the fourth one is Vashikara Vairagya, which is the highest. Vashikara Vairagya means this highest stage. At this stage, the mind gets fully established in renunciation. The yogi loses even an interest. He doesn't even have to make an effort to practice self-restraint. This is the higher form of, practicing dispassion at different stages. But one important thing to remember is, one should not try to divide them into 4 stages. I want to practice the first one, I want to practice second one. No. Actually, mind doesn't allow us to practice a value or a concept in that way. See, for example, I give you an example. Well, today onwards I shall speak less lies. You cannot really practice truthfulness in this way. You should be able to take a decision, I will not tell a lie. Rather, the better decision is, I will speak only the truth, only what is true. In the process, as mind begins to practice, perhaps it goes through these stages. But that is not our botheration. We should not practice, I will practice 1/4 of renunciation now, another quarter later, and the third quarter, the third stage. That way mind doesn't function. It's an important point to remember. So Patanjali and commentators do not mention this. That's mostly because in those days it was very well understood. So we should remember this very well now, because we are now discussing these ancient teachings in this 21st century. So mind doesn't travel and function in bits and stages. Here we find an attempt to analyze and study how mind evolves from an early stage of let's say, beginning stage to a higher and higher stage of renunciation. First, for the first time in our life, we may go to a library and read a wonderful book, or we may listen to a great lecture. And then we, of course, a great lecture that tells us the truth without coming down to our level to please what we want to hear, but to tell us what we need to hear. The commentators make something very, very, very interesting remarks about what kind of scriptural instructions we should seek. If you listen to somebody who is struggling to tell you something that he or she thinks that you be interested in hearing, or rather you pleased to hear, don't listen to him. Scriptures say, very, very, I know it's a very uncompromising, very rude and apparently very cruel analysis. You can ask question. The point is, a scripture states certain facts. That is instructor, the teacher. We read it. Our mind grasps as much as our mind is ready to grasp. That depends upon our evolution. But the scripture doesn't struggle to tell us what we can grasp or what we may be interested in understanding or grasping. No. The scripture tells the truth. That's why speak only the truth. Satya, ahimsa, satya, steya, brahmacharya, aparigraha. You can buy yamas or niyama. These are yamas, of course. Ahimsa means non-violence. Non-violence means non-violence in word, deed, action, thought, movements, everything. Now, can anyone practice this in 100%? Maybe a Buddha or a Christ and the great spiritual teachers of the world must have practiced. Can a beginner try to do that? He may not. He will not physically do any harm, but mentally he may still have some desire to see somebody in a rather difficult situation. That is himsa only, really speaking. He may not do anything, he may not speak anything, but still his mind may have some undesirable thought which may be harmful to others. So there also you are breaking ahimsa. So the point is, but that is the beginning. So to begin with, one can practice at the physical level, then at the verbal level, then thought level, and eventually in complete, in totality. So that should be understood very clearly. So these are the 4 stages in which mind evolves, mind moves in his practice of dispassion. That is the purpose of actually Sadasiva Brahmendra Saraswati. Sadasiva Brahmendra Saraswati was actually an exception to this rule. His story goes like this. He was a great sage and great Pandit. But he was very proud, very arrogant, and he will be very much interested in participating in debates and discussions. And he also enjoyed defeating other Pandits, other scholars in the assembly, sometimes the royal courts. And it became a great embarrassment for scholars to be present in any assembly of scholars or in any debates in which Sadasiva was present. Shiva, that's his name. So finally, he became so arrogant and he became a bit unpopular because of his scholarship and also because of his arrogance. So his own teacher told him once, see, you have learned from scriptures that the highest truth, God, cannot be attained just by logic. Nayamatma belahine lebhya. So that there are many statements there. Na medhaya na bhugdasudena. Medha by intellect alone, by intellectual scholarship alone, bhugdasudena, by multi-phase scholarship alone, you cannot attain this Atma. Nayamatma belahine lebhya. Na medhaya na bhugdasudena. So the Guru told you know all these things, but when are you going to stop talking? When are you going to keep quiet? That was the language in which his guru scolded him. And from that moment onwards, he stopped talking. And he replied, where he closed his mouth with one hand, with the other hand he said, right now, today, this morning. And from that day, that moment onwards, he became silent. And he lived for a long time. He wrote some well-known books on Vedanta and also yoga and so on. And also some of the most moving poetry, philosophical poetry in Sanskrit language, which are still being sung, good, written by Sarvapriyananda. Now, in his case, in one split second, he could practice Vairagya. But even for him, it was not a split second transformation. He became physically silent. He stopped talking and arguing. Now, what happened, then he started thinking, well, I've stopped talking, but mind is still talking. In my mind, words are not coming out, but thoughts are still very violent. Thoughts are arguing. Mind is arguing. Words are not arguing, but mind is still arguing, busy in argument. Then he succeeded in stopping his mind also. His mind also became still. So this is to be understood very clearly when you listen to these talks. So one doesn't really practice these higher values by installments. Deliberately one will not divide into different installments. Mind doesn't function that way. But you take a decision, then mind of course can progress only stage by stage. But that is its function. But we should not try to artificially divide our mental function, mental practice of higher values into installments. Sri Ramakrishna gives a very, very most wonderful and slightly humorous illustration. Maybe the most wonderful illustration. Of course, this is so you read the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, you can see. So it said, in a family, one person told this, maybe we were talking about it. See, in our neighbor, somebody staying in the neighborhood, he has decided to practice renunciation, Vairagya, and had decided to become a monk or something. At that time, this man was going to take bath, so he had put maybe a bottle of oil, clothes, soap. In those days, whatever maybe, with those things he was going to the nearby river to take bath. So this lady, the housewife was telling that in the neighbor, the gentleman living in our neighborhood, is going to practice total Vairagya, renunciation. Going to become a monk or something like that, let's say. Then this man said, the husband said, oh, he's practicing this in installments. That's not the way to practice. If he practice renunciation, it should be total, complete now and today. And he was going to take bath, and he left his home and became a monk, became a wanderer, became a lifelong wanderer. So that is the real, but please remember, nobody should attempt practicing this in the 21st century. One should not ever imagine this is I'm recommending something in the form of some drastic steps. The point is, I'm giving an illustration of renunciation of the highest type. Maybe a Buddha could do that, and he did it. A Shankara, he left his home. Of course, he had to compromise his mother, but then he didn't desist it. Sri Ramakrishna was practicing renunciation right from his birth. So you find great men and great women, great epoch makers able to practice this Paravairagya, which we are going to discuss in the next sutra, that is 16th Sutra. Okay, now the 16th Sutra is in a way qualitatively different, and it is higher than the 15th one. In the 15th Sutra, which is called Aparavairagya, secondary renunciation, you practice dispassion, but still there are some desires latent in the mental system, but you are able to control, you are able to restrain, you are able to practice self-restraint. But under favorable circumstances, they may come out and they may connect with the sense objects. That possibility is always there. But when you practice Paravairagya, higher Vairagya, the second stage, the higher renunciation, then these desires become totally and completely non-functional. In the sense, they become like seeds which are burned. If you have got some seeds with you, you are not going to sow them in the soil, but you have maybe in a packet or in a box or a suitcase, by some accident, if those seeds fall in a fertile land, still they may become sprouts, they may become plants, they become trees. Could happen. But you don't allow them. You keep them firmly locked under the drawer or in the suitcase. So they are not going to come out. You restrain them, you control them. But suppose you take out the seeds and burn them, may fry them in oil, and then you keep, not necessarily in a suitcase, you keep in your hand, even if it falls on very fertile soil, it is not going to become sprouts, it's not going to grow. Why? Because it's burned. It's Dagdha Bija Nyaya. I mean the analogy of burned seed. So that is characteristic of higher renunciation. I mean, they are totally non-functional. They are as good as, the seeds become as good as non-seeds. That is the characteristic of this higher para vairagya. That is the 16th Sutra. Tatparam Purushakhyadehi Gunavaidrushnyam. That is the 16th Sutra. So, what it says is, this Param Tat Purushakhyadehi Gunavaidrushnyam. That is the Sutra. This Tat Param, I mean Param Tat, this supreme renunciation, it is called supreme because this higher renunciation, Paravairagyam, higher renunciation or dispassion, it's very close to Nirodha Samadhi, Sampragnata Samadhi. So that's why it is explained as Param, means higher, supreme. Purusakhyadi, it means this knowledge of Purusha. So what happens, the knowledge of Purusha, from this knowledge of Purusha, the Jnanam emerges. Not only that, when you reach that stage, you become completely dispassionate, you become totally free from any kind of desire. This is the idea behind. Now we should remember, in the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, there are two types of teachings to begin with. There are certain teachings, certain ideas which are very relevant, which we can easily practice in this 21st century. Certain values which I mentioned, yamas and niyamas, and also the importance of first being establishing yamas and niyamas before practicing asana, pranayama. These are all very, very important and psychologically very, very important, very scientific teachings that you find in the Yoga Sutra. Or maybe this Kriya Yoga, I mean tapaswadhyaya ishvara pranidhananani kriya yoga. And also the description of vrittis, vasanas, samskaras. These are all very, very scientific. In fact, understanding some of these mechanisms of human mind will be very helpful for us to live live with greater wisdom in our interaction with people around. Also, while confronting problems in our everyday life, including family and society or office places. Many of these values that you learn from Patanjali Yoga Sutras are very helpful, very practical, and very practical, very empirical level in everyday life activities. Very, very important. But then there are certain other teachings. Either you find the Vibhuti Yoga description of the occult powers, or in the Kaivalyapada some sutras which teach about higher samadhis, and also like Paravairagya, supreme renunciation, which is the characteristics of a Buddha or a Christ, of the great epoch makers of the world in spiritual traditions. So these are some of the higher teachings which we should keep in our mind. I mean, these are higher possibilities which are being achieved and demonstrated by great men and women in all traditions from all times. So this Paravairagyam belongs to that category, supreme renunciation. So it says this Vairagya, this Paravairagya, is of nature of non-attachment to the gunas, means we will be able to detach ourselves from our own essential mental constituents, which are Sattva-guna, Rajo-guna, Tamo-guna. We will not have even a desire to be a Sattvic person, because even that desire is gone. That means it's a very high level of renunciation. The Gita says, Resovarjam Resopyasya Param Drishtva Nivartade. Bhagavad Gita says that this higher renunciation is possible only when a person realizes Atman. So this 16th Sutra belongs to that category, which describes supreme renunciation. According to Vyasa, this Paravairagya is nothing but the highest state of knowledge. This means Jnanasaiva Parakashta Vairagyam. That is Vyasa says. He says this higher renunciation is the very nature of the highest spiritual enlightenment or highest spiritual achievement. It is not a value that practice in our life, like the previous Vairagya, dispassion. See, to understand the greatness of the supreme renunciation, we should clearly understand the dynamics of the previous Vairagya, dispassion that we discussed in the 15th Sutra. First, you go to a library and read a book or listen to an idea, or maybe even in everyday conversation, you come to know, well, there are certain wonderful things in this world, but there are higher things that do not belong to this world. Higher universal values, spiritual values. I should be able to practice them. So, I should be able to practice some of these higher values. Yamas and yamas are examples, which are found in all traditions. So, this desire to practice higher values, actually this desire is actually a kind of desirelessness. You should understand the word correctly. A strong desire to practice higher values, like the values of renunciation, is the beginning of your freedom from lower desires. To have a higher supreme goal, to have a higher desire, will free all of us from the clutches of lower desires. That is actually the first stage. So it is actually the kindergarten of higher evolution. As I mentioned, there is another kind of evolution possible for human beings. And the great philosophers, mystics, of all traditions have demonstrated through their own experience and life and attainments, the reality of this possibility. That is, this higher evolution. It is not biological evolution, it's evolution at the higher spiritual level, which is sometimes called Raja Yoga in the language of Bhagavad Gita. Actually, the idea of Raja Yoga is not directly coming from Patanjali. That somebody should understand very well. Raja Yoga is being mentioned actually in the Bhagavad Gita, 2nd chapter. Imam vivasude yogam proktavanaham vayam vivaswan manave praha manu ikshakave abravit evam parampara praptam imam rajasyo viduhu sakalena ihamahada yogo nashta parandava. In the 4th chapter, 1st and 2nd verses, you find Lord Krishna is speaking about a long lineage of great philosopher kings who were kings for all practical purposes, reigning over huge kingdom and empires, doing all duties of a king. At the same time, they had the calmness, the quietude of a sage, Rishi, Rajarshi, that Shankaracharya says, Rajanascha, Rishayascha, Rajashriyaka. They were both kings and also sages rolled into one. That a renunciation, this dispassion of a sage and the dynamism of a king. Rajatvam Aishwarya Sambhati Rishitvam Tasyaga Sukshmartha Dasyana Kshamattu. Shankarananda Saraswati writes in his Tiga on Bhagavad Gita, based on Shankaracharya's commentary, Tiga on Shankara's commentary. It means the ideal of a king is secular prosperity, earthly, empirical prosperity, achievements, efficiency, dynamism, and so on. And the characteristic of a sage or a saint or a philosopher is to see the limitations of all these empirical, material prosperities. So if you're all into one, it's called Raja Yoga. Raja Yoga actually doesn't come from Patanjali. Of course, the hallmark of a Raja Yogi is the practice of yamas and niyamas. They achieve this status of being philosopher kings through the practice of Ashtanga Yoga. But the first clear exposition of this could be found in the Bhagavad Gita, 2nd chapter. So actually, when a person reaches this Paravairagya, then he becomes a sage, but he may be sitting on a throne. Sitting on a throne with a philosopher's outlook is the greatest achievement that anyone can conceive of. So that is the conclusion of today's class, and you are most welcome to ask questions. Most welcome. Thank you.
When you were explaining the 15th Sutra, you explained Drashta, Anushravika. You skipped out the word Vishaya Vitrash.
Okay, I shall explain. Oh, you mean I want... okay, that's fine. Wonderful.
I mean, another thing, the Anushravika, you're referring to the Karma Kanda of the Vedas?
Yeah, actually, yeah. Anusrava. You see, Anusrava means stage by stage, different portions of the Vedas. So, Anusravika, anything that is coming from the Vedas. And the Karma Kanda, Puramimamsa Vedas talk about various deeds. If you practice rituals, yajnas, yagas, and Sapta Haviri yajnas, Sapta Soma yajnas, 14 types of yajnas. Vedic rituals are mentioned in the Vedic literature, auxiliary literature, of course. So, these scriptures, they are the secondary parts of the Vedas. They are not Vedanta. They do not constitute Vedanta. They are not in the Upanishads. This is part of the Karma Kanda. So, Karma Kanda is meant for recommendations of the Vedic rituals are meant for people who are not yet ready to practice this higher philosophy. For them, they should be asked to do certain things, certain good meritorious deeds. If you are very healthy, active, if a person is very healthy and active, you want to do things, You tell him you should practice renunciation. You should not do that. Rather, you should ask him to take up some good work, charitable work, philanthropical work, and so on. Because our human resources, mental and physical resources, should be diverted to a creative channel. That's why, in fact, Kumarila Bhatta, in his Tantravartikam, it's a well-known book on Bhatta Mimamsa, he says, certain portions of the Vedas recommend and have injunctions meant to encourage people to practice certain rituals with a desire to achieve some good merits in this world and next, because otherwise they will divert the energy and time into undesirable channels. They become a source of trouble to others. So our human physical and mental energy should be diverted to creative channel. And after that stage is over, when you reach the next stage, then you will be able to practice some kind of self-restraint. That's an important thing. For that, karma kanda is mentioned. Okay, now drishta. Drishta here means laukika. Laukika means empirical, worldly enjoyments in this world. Anusavika means celestial. Things which are related to higher planes of existence where we are supposed to go after death. Surga Kshatra. Vishavidrishnasya. Now, Vishavidrishnasya means a person who are completely free from desires in this Vishaya, sense objects. For such a person, what happens, he will be able to practice this able to achieve Vashikara. Vashikara is the name of this particular Vairagya. Means that person will be able to become master of his own senses and his own sense objects and his own mind. So, Drishta Anusavika, excuse me?
The word Trishna means thirst. Trishna is lack of thirst, lack of lusting after.
Visheshena means a specific or comprehensive different kinds of desires. Vitrishna is a person, such a person who is the Vigata Trishna. That is also the real interpretation. Because we is a upasarga that comes in different contexts and it changes the meaning, it reinforces the meaning, it changes the meaning, it makes meaning opposite, and there are different functions of upasargas. So we here means Vigata Trishnasya, a person whose Trishna is gone. Vigata Visheshena Gata means it is completely disappeared from him. That's the real meaning here. Means a person who has completely abandoned his Trishna, his desire on Vishayas. Vishayas means sense objects. So Vishaya Vitrishnasya means a person who is a Vishaya Vitrishna, who means his Trishna, his desire in Vishayas is Vigata, means gone, disappeared, Visheshena Gataha, completely disappeared from him. So that's the meaning here. So
this roughly corresponds to the Vairagya of Sadhana Chatuspai.
Exactly. Yeah. Vairagya is a common word used in Vedanta and yoga, everywhere. Vairagya, that's why I mentioned, Vairagya is a universal value. When you practice Vairagya, actually you are boarding the bus to higher evolution. The ability to practice self-restraint, to say no to oneself, to one's own mind, to one's own senses. It could be when the mind is going after something undesirable, or mind is perhaps trying to do something which is undesirable, to speak a lie, or to get something that belongs to others, or to play games with one's own mind. All these are we may call temptations. What do you call temptations in many traditions? So actually, Patanjali describes all of them as forces coming from our own mind. We should be able to tell our own mind, no, don't do that. This is self-restraint. That is the first stage. When you get established in this vairagya to such an extent that the very question of temptation doesn't even arise, that is paravairagya, being transcended to higher level of renunciation. So, drishta anusaviga vishavitrushnasya. A person who has lost all desire, who is completely free from all desires, either for empirical enjoyments or for heavenly enjoyments, for that person, he gets his vasikara, means vasikara samjna means name. He gets this particular kind of renunciation, dispassion, which is known as vasikara. Vasikara means when you are the master of your mind, your senses. That's the idea behind. Yeah.
Hari Om Maharaj.
Hari Om, yeah.
Maharaj, one very small question to start off. So Sadashiva Brahmendra you were talking about is the same Sadashiva Brahmendra who was also a composer and wrote a lot of famous...
Chinda Nasti Kila, all those things.
Bruhi Mukundeti.
Yeah, all this. Yeah.
Yes, okay.
He wrote, he didn't write anything to begin with. Then some other saints told him, why don't you, may have indicated, because he won't speak to anyone, indicated to him. Then he started writing. He has written some books on Vedanta, and also he is a great devotee. So like that. So even for him, he has to go through these two stages. First, he practiced silence at the physical, verbal level. Then he started practicing silence at the mental level. When he achieved in practicing silence at the mental level, and then he transcended. But that's because he was in need of that kind of restraint. So he was a learned person, but he was also very arrogant and very argumentative, engaging debates and discrediting other soldiers in the assembly of Pandits, and that created problems for others. So this is some of the stories. So they complained to his guru. So his guru called him and asked him, when are you going to keep quiet? When do you stop? When are you going to stop talking? So by gesture he indicated right now, and from there onwards he never spoke. So that also shows that he was a very, he must have been a great sadhaka, spiritual seeker in his previous life. Otherwise he won't be able to practice this intense dispassion so quickly. That's the idea behind.
It's interesting that you brought up towards the end, because that was going to be my next question. Now when modern psychiatrists talk about how someone has to beat addiction, one of the first things they seem to say is that it needs to be a gradual process. You can't just go cold turkey, right? You can't stop overnight. It is not possible to say, I am not going to smoke anymore, or I am not going to right? It's going to be a gradual process, and they need to drop it from say 20 cigarettes a day to 10 cigarettes a day to 5 cigarettes or something like that, right? So this idea of doing this overnight seems to be a radical way of thinking about it. How do we look at these two things?
Really, in the case of Sadashiva Brahmendra, it is an extreme case, and he could even think of immediately stopping, immediately putting an end to his habit of argumentation. That shows that he, of course, you have to remember, these differences cannot be really explained except in the light of the doctrine of laws of karma and the doctrine of reincarnation, rebirth. So he must have practiced a lot of tapasya spiritual austerities, disciplines in his previous life. So in this life, just one statement, maybe a little scolding from his guru was all that was required for him to continue from where he stopped in his previous life. That's the idea. So that's it. But for people, for great men like Sri Ramakrishna or Shankaracharya, there was no need of going through stages. So that shows Sadashiva Brahmendra was an advanced spiritual seeker in his previous life. Otherwise, it's impossible. Lord Krishna himself says in the Gita, "Na buddhivedam janayet ajnanam karma sankinam." I mean, people who are attached to karma, duties, and the results, they're extremely attached to their work and its result. If you tell them one day, no, you should practice karma yoga, disinterested work, actually your mind will go blank, really. Suppose you're working hard for examinations, maybe some kind of a, whatever it is, you're preparing yourself very hard, and if you start practicing disinterested work, you take away the deadline from your mind, then you won't be able to do anything, because mind creates a vacuum. That will not happen to a real karma yogi. Because real karma yogi, this vacuum will be automatically replaced by a higher ideal. I should do my work, so dharma ideal. So that's why Lord Krishna says, "Na buddhivedam janayet ajnanam karma sankinam." People who are attached to their actions and the result, don't tell all of them, don't change their mind all of a sudden, overnight. No, today, tomorrow morning onwards, you should practice dispassion, detachment. No. Psychologically, it is impossible. Another problem is it can damage a person's future. Or one may practice hypocrisy. You will say, all right, I shall practice karma yoga, all of a sudden. It doesn't happen like that. See, Girish Chandra Ghosh was a devotee of Sri Ramakrishna. He was a drunkard, a bohemian. Sri Ramakrishna did not ask him to stop drinking immediately. Sri Ramakrishna knew he won't be able to do that. So Sri Ramakrishna actually turned him around, first told him, why don't you take the name of God once, 3 times a day, then once in the morning, and at least before going to bed, at least while waking up. He said, I can't do that. Then Sri Ramakrishna told him, well, you give your responsibility, full responsibility, power, spiritual power of attorney to me. After that, Girish Chandra Ghosh always reminded himself, well, I have given my responsibility to the great teacher, so I should not do anything wrong. So it became physically impossible for him to do anything wrong. So you can find all great teachers. They are unanimous in this view. That means everything can and should happen gradually. The way the gradual doesn't necessarily mean slow. That's important. Gradual means stage by stage. Even because gradual means you just, okay, let us see what happens. That is not gradual. So when you talk about everything happens gradually, you're talking about the nature of evolution, not necessarily the pace of evolution. It's not necessarily slowly, but gradually. Okay. Thank you.
Namaskaram.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, please.
Okay. Namaskaram, Swamiji. I just had a question about the Vairagyan. And basically there are one side of the Vairagyan is that you know you don't want to do it, and you basically eliminate that desire and kind of tell your mind that, okay, this desire is not worthwhile, and you kind of avoid doing that thing. The other aspect of it is that there is more stronger view that this has got nothing to do with me, and you completely don't even you become kind of indifferent to it, right? So the question is really, how do you, that more like burnt seeds that you talked about. How do you go from something how do you go from one stage to another? It's what I'm trying to understand is.
Really,
into avoidance, but it keeps coming back. So how do you do from
really,
avoidance to avoidance?
the actual progress in spiritual life should be experienced to be clear to us. If any kind of explanation will not do. But in real life, we should always begin with trying to practice some degree of self-restraint in our actions, thoughts, words, deeds, desires, all this. Some self-restraint. When we become well established in this self-restraint, ideal of self-restraint, then it's possible gradually the self-restraint, self-control becomes our natural habit. When it becomes a natural habit, then we do not have to practice self-control. We won't have to deliberately make an effort to practice self-control. Self-control becomes an automatic, natural, spontaneous characteristic when we reach an advanced stage of practicing self-control. But to begin with, we should be able to practice self-control. Even before the Yatamana, the first stage, at the beginning, sometimes we may have to practice self-control by diverting our mind to something more creative, something less damaging, something more elevating. So that is also one kind of self-restraint. Time and energy, mental and physical energy and time may be diverted to undesirable channels. So we want to practice self-control. The first stage is to divert them into some creative, constructive, higher channels, and that will automatically result in self-restraining the negative orientation of the senses and mind, and gradually we will be able to practice self-restraint. And as a result of practicing self-restraint for a long time, it becomes an effortless, natural habit to be always self-restrained in our actions, thoughts and feelings. At that time, you don't have to make an effort. The first stage, you have to make an effort. That's called yatamana, means you have to work hard to do that. So there is a effort involved in the first stage. Last stage means the last stage there is no effort involved. In any area of learning or skills, when you become effortless, it means you have become a master. When you have to work hard, in the beginning if you are learning driving, you have just learned, then you have to be very watchful, you have to be very... But when you have been driving for 50 years, then you don't have to be watchful. It becomes an automatic process. So in every branch of learning or skill, at the higher stage, it becomes a natural habit when we become masters of that area of learning, or whatever it is. Yeah, that's it.
Okay. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. No,
Maharaj, question. When, say, you became monk, at that time you had vairagya in your heart.
Yeah.
Now, can we say at that time that you had para vairagya?
That's I have never analyzed it, really speaking, Actually, I never thought of any of these things. My natural interest was in the scriptures and nothing else, that's all. So, and unless you are able to practice vairagya, you won't be able to enjoy reading and teaching and contemplating on these scriptural ideas, which are certainly not very entertaining to anyone. You see, there is absolutely no humor and no entertainment in the process. So you are talking about these ideas and I can tell you very frankly, many of these ideas may not be very, very pleasing to many listeners. That's why actually I mentioned at the beginning of the statement. So commentators talking about yatamana vairagya, they say a scripture tells you what you need to hear and what you may be interested in hearing. That's the scripture we have to read. So, and it makes a lot of difference, really speaking. Really speaking. To be able to listen to things which may not be very entertaining, you need vairagya. Because your senses and mind should be diverted to something elevating, something constructive and creative. Your senses always want enjoyment. It's an important thing. Senses do not practice renunciation. Senses practice the opposite of renunciation. And actually, the dynamics of sensory processes, if you analyze, you understand. Senses always want to present something before your mind so that your mind will be always projected outward. Outward means what you see, what you hear, what you smell, what you taste, and so on, five senses. Now, if you are teaching, if you are learning, if you are listening to Vedanta scriptures like Patanjali Yoga Sutra, actually, if your mind enjoys listening to Patanjali Yoga Sutras, it means you are actually practicing Vairagya. Paran Vairagya and Apara Vairagya, that analysis, as I mentioned earlier, there is no real line of demarcation. This is an important point, remember. In the practice of truthfulness, non-violence, etc., you don't really draw lines of demarcation. Scriptures will analyze them by classifying them to different categories. But those categories are only meant to explain and describe. In mental life, we don't draw lines. That's an important trend. We draw lines only on the board, on the paper. We don't draw lines in our mind. As I mentioned earlier, really speaking, that farmer who left his home, that moment, that day, and renounced everything, we do not know whether he actually was able to continue that intense renunciation from that moment onwards. But remember, he made a grand beginning, there is no doubt about it. He may have gone to a forest, he may have gone to Himalayas, he may have lived there. Again, he had to struggle a lot. Again, he had to go through, travel through difficult routes. That we don't know. But the point is, Sri Ramakrishna was giving just one example. So we don't draw lines in our mind. Paravairagya, Aparavairagya. Now I'm thinking this. Now actually it doesn't happen like that. Mind doesn't analyze. If your mind is analyzing, then you have gone beyond mind. With your mind, you cannot analyze what is going on in your mind. You should transcend your mind to be able to really understand what is going on in your mind. That's an important thing. You should be able to transcend mind to really observe and understand what is going on in your own mind. This is an important thing.
So if we say, if you have spiritual experience,
yeah.
With the spiritual experience, if you have the vairagya,
yeah.
that vairagya is more concrete than just leaving your house on a suddenly leaving your house because you were hurt or something like that. Right?
You are right. You are right. Vyanta was a butcher, and he was a great teacher of spiritual wisdom in Mahabharata. But that Vyanta had several years earlier left his home, went to forest, practiced renunciation and meditation. Then, after reaching the highest degree of spiritual achievement, then he continued doing his job of his father, sitting in a shop in the market. Now remember, I shall sit in the market, I can be a Vyanta. It doesn't happen like that. That's an important point, remember. See, Sri Ramakrishna says an expert dancer doesn't make a false step. Now, if there is a real dancer playing on the stage with like a great expert, it means he must have practiced for several years. If you are singing very well, if you are a wonderful musician, it means you need not tell me, but I can tell you that you must have practiced for several years, hard discipline. Without that, you won't be able to sing like that. Like that, Vyanta had already practiced this renunciation uh, uh, for several years. That's what Mahabharata tells. And then he himself says, in the Adha Gita it tells. And then he himself decided, well, this is my father's job, this is my duty. He did that. Lord Krishna was practicing renunciation all his life. He was a king. But how many people can practice that kind of renunciation at the same time being a monarch? Janaka, Ashwapati, there are many Panchala, there are many characters in the many great royal sages who were in the Upanishad literature. So they all practiced spiritual disciplines for long years, and then they came back and became a kingdom. And they continued ruling the country because that was the duty. So you should always remember, philosopher king means, philosopher here doesn't mean philosopher, academic philosopher. It means sage in that sense. Sage, wise, those who are enduring spiritual wisdom. So we should never assume, I would rather continue my life as long as I want, the way I want, because there is no need of anything, any real practice. I can be like Janaka. I can be like Plato's philosopher kings. It doesn't happen like that. That's an important point to remember. There is not one instance in the traditional scriptures where one became an overnight sage. It doesn't happen. Even Ravana Maharshi, he had a problem. His father died. Actually, when he confronted the reality of something, this mystery of death of somebody whom he had seen till now, suddenly he left his home and then he stayed for a long time. He practiced tapasya. Then only he became Ravana Maharshi actually. This happened. What about Sri Ramakrishna? For how many years Sri Ramakrishna practiced devotion? Vivekananda, he got training under Sri Ramakrishna. You can't sing. Even the greatest of incarnations, Sri Krishna himself, Ahoratri Chadushastya Sambrutto Tapati Kala. So Bhagavata Purana describes how for long years Sri Krishna practiced austerities, studies under the great sage Sandipani. Then he became a philosopher king. So even those whom we consider to be mystics, they had to practice. Okay? Yeah. Thank you for requesting. Anybody else?
Go ahead, Yogi.
Yogi, please go ahead. Yeah. Namaskar.
Abhyasa, Vairagya.
Yeah.
Vairagya, Abhyasa, Vairagya.
Yeah. Yeah.
That one I heard at least three different interpretations.
Yeah.
Abhyasa is restraint of the vrittis and Vairagya is detachment.
Yeah.
And first interpretation is Abhyasa and Vairagya both are required.
Yeah.
That is one interpretation.
Yeah.
Second one is either Abhyasa by itself or Vairagya in itself.
Yeah.
When perfected will be
Yeah.
able to liberate. Third
Yeah.
one is it's actually practice of the Vairagya that is meant by these words.
Yeah.
Each one is correct.
Yeah, really speaking, there are two broad views. One is repeated practice of Vairagya is one interpretation according to Sadasiva Brahmendra Saraswati. That's why he actually describes these 4 stages of, Yatamana, Vitireka, Ekendriya and Vashikara. Vashikara Vairagya is the highest stage of Apara Vairagya. So, Abhyasa of Vairagya, repeated practice of renunciation or dispassion or detachment. That seems to be the most scientific interpretation. Because the 14th Sutra, it refers to Satu Dirghakala Nairandarya Satkara Sevito Dudhabhumi. Here, Sa means Abhyasa. And this abhyasa should be practiced for a long time, dirghakala, nairandarya, without any interruption, and also satkara, I mean adradisya, with great sanctity and sacredness. Now the point is, but this 14th Sutra doesn't tell abhyasa of what. So actually this sutra is preparing the background of what you should practice. Abhyasa of what? That what is explained in the 15th Sutra, that is Drishta Anusaviga Vishavidrishnasya Vasikara Samya Vairagyam. The Vairagya should be practiced. Vairagya should be subjected to abhyasa, dirghakala, for a long time, without any interruption, and with great reverence and sense of sanctity and sacredness. That seems to be the most, at least to me, acceptable interpretation. You know, there are many books, so many books are there, so many interpretations are there, you know. Vyasa's commentary is the foundation. Vyasa agrees with this view, and then Shankaracharya's Vivarana is there, Tattva Vaisharadi, the Vajaspati, Rajamartanda Bhojaraja, and so on, Vijnana Bhikshu, Vartiga, etc. Yoga Mani Prabha is there. So the point is, this abhyasa of vairagya, repeated practice of dispassion or renunciation, seems to be the most appropriate interpretation to my mind. Okay? Yeah. Thank you for the question. Thank you for wonderful discussion. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.